All right, now we're going live on Facebook. So we're about to do that right now. So because of technology, we're going to Zoom. So that means now people will be able to see us, and this will be connected to our YouTube channel. So as people are trying to jump in, I will be allowing them to come in. I'm waiting on Dr. Littles to be able to join us. And I will tell you now that we are exactly live on Facebook. Hello and welcome everybody. We are here and we are here to talk about the history of Ardmore from an African-American perspective. And we are live. And today, before we even get started, we are going to honor the legendary Mazola McKerson. Today is her actual birthday, January the 10th, the first African-American female mayor of Ardmore, Oklahoma, Chickasaw Nation. And we have her son and daughter on with us, Kwame, and then, of course, the lovely Flossie Thurston, along with Roy that's on there. Kwame, go ahead and open up and tell us about your mom and tell us about Miss Mazola McKerson.
Yes, thank you, Cedric. Mazola McKerson, as you said, was born today, January the 10th, 2000. I'm sorry, 1921. 1921. Mother was a very humble person. She came from a place called Bluff, Oklahoma, and migrated up to Ardmore, Oklahoma, and stayed with my great aunt Pearl Jeffries, and she just moved on from there. She humble beginning. She started out.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kwame. That's Roy.
Okay, yeah, started out a very humble beginning, selling meals out of her house. We used to take food all over Ardmore, Oklahoma. Then she later got a start with another group of ladies, and she moved into the restaurant, the Gourmet Restaurant, which was, I always brag on the restaurant. I say my mother's restaurant was second to none to any restaurant in Oklahoma, in the state of Oklahoma. Matter of fact, mother, she catered not only in Ardmore, but she took her catering service as far as Atlanta, Georgia, and other places too. She used the Indians, the Chickasaw Indians used to have this big cook up killing of the buffaloes, and she used to go up in the buffalo mounts and cook their, black woman, cooking Indian meals. So mother has a very historic background, and I'm proud to say, I always say mother was a genius in her time, and in time period, because she did a whole lot of things to bring forth and just went on out. But of course, she couldn't have done this without the backing of her husband, Alfred McCarson. So they worked as a tandem as far as the moving things. So yeah, she was a great lady.
All right. Well, thank you, Kwame. And I'm going to bring your sister in here, Flossie. Now, Flossie, from my understanding, y'all live right by Mount Zion on First Street. Then you went to
Flossie.
Okay. You lived on White Street, and then you had connections out in Springer. Is that right? Roy, your wife right there, Flossie there?
No, she's in the kitchen. I'm trying to get in here.
Okay, well, you say something because that was your mother-in-law. Say something, Roy, about her.
Well, I've been knowing the McCarsons all my life. I was born and raised in Ardmore, born in 1940, went to Dunbar, Douglas High School, played a lot of sports at Ardmore. Ardmore is a very proud city, and we really had a great time coming up as children in Ardmore. I'm gonna leave the rest for Floss as soon as I can get out of the kitchen. She's in the pans.
All right, I got you and everything. But I will ask you a question because I'm going to share my screen, and then we're going to bring Dr. Littles in, and I'm going to just do this because Dr. Littles is the one who basically is going to go into elaboration and talk more about it, and then we're going to hear from Angela because we got so much that we want to share. And so I see the screen. So Roy, looking at this screen right here, who is this beautiful lady right here, second from the right on the ground right here? Did you see that picture?
That's Flossie.
All right, and who's these other ladies up here? And I see them holding the banner that says Ardmore Douglas.
That's
Kwame?
Yes, if we go from right to left, that's Faye Manor,
Mm-hmm.
Flossie, Mary Louise Musgrove, Patricia Grant.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the lady next to Patricia, but that's the Eagles, I believe, on the other end.
Virginia Akers?
Yes.
Evelyn, I believe.
Evelyn
Evelyn Akers,
that's
right, Evelyn Akers.
Stubblefield. That's
Stubblefield, that's
Stubblefield.
true.
Linda Stubblefield. Okay, Linda, yeah.
Right.
And who's the teacher?
The teacher's Miss Lackey. She taught eighth
Miss
grade.
Tolliver. That's Miss Tolliver.
Miss Tolliver, I'm sorry, Miss Tolliver, right. And the other person standing next to Miss Tolliver was Milton Stewart.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I got you. So that's a lot of history. So I'm going to stop right there. I see Martin Maytubby in there, Martin and everything. But Dorscine, pick it up from here and tell us about what happened at Ardmore Douglas back during the day when the football team, and then also comment on Miss Mayzola.
Well, I would rather for the people that went to Ardmore Douglas to comment on some of the traditions that they started. I will mention one. I wanted Paulette Davis to be on here because she is the great historian on as far as culture is concerned. But Ardmore Douglas was very, very proud of their football team, of which Mr. Thurston was one of the proud members. But when they would play out of town, and if they won the game, when they came, when the bus would arrive back in Ardmore with the triumphant team, as soon as the bus crossed over the last rail of the railroad track, the bus would start blowing its horn. And that was like, wake up, everybody, we won. And so it was like, it was announcing. And so they would blow the horn all the way from the racetrack to back to the school to let them know that their team has won.
Well, it's amazing you say that because Roy Thurston played on that undefeated Douglas team. So that means, Roy, every time y'all cross those tracks coming through the Arbuckles coming back from the city, y'all never lost. So it wasn't never quiet when y'all came back, right?
That's correct. We started blowing the horn, blowed it all the way to the school.
Really? Now,
Such
Martin,
a great time back.
Now, Martin, you was a kid during that time period. You grew up in Northtown. What did it mean to you, man?
Northtown, well, since we started out talking about the McCarson, I just want to make my link to that. Of course, we didn't learn this until later life, but I'm from Boswell, Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
And McCarson's part of the family. They're from around Bluff, I believe.
No, that's the Jefferson, the Holman that you were talking about.
Okay.
You're right. And Maytoba now probably are related some far down there around by Bluff, and as you said,
Right.
so we go way back.
But the other connection is what we used to call the hut. That post there. So maybe before we finish that, Kwame could give us a little history on that also.
I would really like to.
I was the last commander of that post, but it's part of our history also.
Was that Willie Stevenson?
Yes, sir. Willie Stevenson Post, 264.
Okay, I got you.
Which is closed now.
Yeah, and Mr. McCarson used to have boxing down there on Burton Street back in the day, right?
That's true.
Yeah, got it on there. Well, listen, what we're gonna do, we're gonna pause and then we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna bring Angela in right now. And I'm gonna ask everybody to mute except for Roy. I want you and Flossie to stay there. But we're gonna hear from Angela because Angela, we always got to have our freedom update and go back to the very beginning. And the reason why we're doing this, and everybody that's watching, you can share your comments on the box. People are wanting to know what they can do to find out about their Indian history. And so, Angela, I got the map up on the screen right now. And if y'all look at that, you can see the original map of Chickasaw Nation. And on there you will see in the middle it says Carter, but then it has Pickens, and it has Tishomingo, and then it has Pontotoc, and then there's Panola. So now when the Indians vote for their officers, they represent the different districts or so. So Angela, we're going to listen to you, and then we're going to bring in Dorscine, and we're just going to talk about our history. Angela, if you would please, a little bit about yourself and tell everybody about what you're doing when it comes to history for us to try to figure out where we come in our Indian heritage.
No problem. Thank you so very much. My name is, well, good evening to everyone. My name is Angela Walton Raji. I hope you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. I am a researcher and a writer and a blogger, and I have been researching freedmen from Indian Territory steadily since 1991. So that's over 30 years. My ancestors came from the Choctaw Nation, just a little bit east of Chickasaw country and a little bit to the north. My family came from Scullyville in the northern district of the Choctaw Nation. But when I discovered my family's documents, now I always knew the family had a tie to the Choctaw Nation. I knew my great-grandmother, who was an original Dawes enrollee. And when I found the records, I began to recognize the surnames of others. And my family came from nearby Port Coffee area in the Scullyville district. Since that time, I committed myself to researching families from all 5 nations because I discovered that, well, I discovered surnames that I knew, that I grew up with in Fort Smith, Arkansas, right on the border where the Treaty of 1866 was signed, actually, that abolished slavery in Indian Territory. And most importantly, let's see, I think of that map maybe have disappeared. Is the map?
I'll bring it back up.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead. I was going to pull up some. Go ahead.
The native people who were removed to the territory, and we're talking the 1830s and 1840s, beginning with the Choctaw removal in 1830 in the winter of 1830-31. That was the first of the 5 removals, and many people simply refer to them, of course, obviously, as the Trail of Tears removal. But what's most significant that in the 1830s and 40s, particularly from the state of Mississippi, the 2 tribes of which we're focusing on this evening, particularly the Choctaw and Chickasaw Nations, they arrived in the 1830s. And the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit was the first treaty that was signed, but shortly afterwards, there was another treaty that brought Cherokees, Chickasaws, Creeks, and Seminoles later, other treaties that were signed, removal treaties. But most importantly, there were people of African descent being taken west also. And what is not often mentioned enough is that people were brought to the same parts where the native people ended up settling in this territory that had been set aside for them, known as Indian Territory. Now, on the map, I really like the map that you've shown because I see Pontotoc, I see Tishomingo, I see Pickens, I see, I think down there, there's Panola somewhere on that map. The fact is that if you look at a map of Mississippi, you're going to see Pontotoc County. You're going to see certainly, I'm sorry?
You'll see Tishomingo too.
Yes, you will see Tishomingo. You're going to see some of these exact same places. You're going to see Panola, and you're going to see places in both Choctaw and Chickasaw country that have same names in modern day Oklahoma. And of course, what you're showing is the Chickasaw Nation. And one thing that's very significant, even as you look, now, one thing it's interesting, lands had been set aside with all the different treaties and the tribes that were removed to the territory, specifically for them. But with Chickasaws in particular, they did not have initially, we're talking the 1830s during the removal years, they didn't have land that was strictly theirs. They ended up leasing land from the Choctaw Nation. So you find some communities, you find that there's a little bit of overlap. And because they ended up leasing land, you often see records and references to both tribes together, Choctaw and Chickasaw, Chickasaw and Choctaw. You see them frequently together. But it was because of the fact that many things were done together of those 2 nations. And even when the treaty abolishing slavery was signed, Choctaws and Chickasaws signed the same exact Reconstruction Treaty in 1866 in April in Fort Smith. But what's significant though, on that map, if you take a look at it, I see, as I look at it, I'm seeing freedmen communities. Of course, I see Pontotoc and I see Tishomingo, but I also think about the communities of freedmen that came from some of these areas. And I see, of course, Love County and the community of Love and Marshall. There was a Marshall town that was actually a freedmen settlement. But I'm looking and I'm seeing Paul's Valley, and I'm seeing places that I can pull up Dawes cards that reflect these very communities where not dozens, but hundreds of freed people, freedmen as they were later called or designated, that's where they lived. But they didn't just sort of live sort of, oh Lord, thank the Lord, we're free. They were people who established communities. These were people who established churches. They had schools eventually that emerged, and they became a very, very vibrant people. And Chickasaw freedmen have one fascinating, I'll call it a factoid, as you sometimes see people refer to online, that Chickasaw freedmen were activists because the Chickasaw Nation abrogated the treaty. They broke the treaty of 1866. They did not make their formerly enslaved people full citizens of the nation, although the individuals did get land allotments during the Dawes process at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century. But the activism that came from Chickasaw freedmen, if you pull up the congressional record, and I'm talking from the Second Congress, and we're talking in the 1880s and 1890s, how many freedmen ended up going to Congress to testify on their behalf? So many of them who also, they were not necessarily excited that statehood was coming because they wanted to know what's going to happen to our people, what is going to take place. And it's something that is very, very important that people realize there's a fascinating chapter in history that's missing, a group of activists. And you think of the names that come from these communities, you know, you think of the Humdies, the Stevensons, the Coheys, the Cobbs, the Roberts, and on and on and on. These are fascinating communities, but also fascinating family clans. And I became intrigued just from researching families in the Chickasaw Nation. I kept seeing family after family, and the matriarch of the family was always a woman called Elsie Stevenson. And I said, she couldn't have had that many children. Well, she didn't. There were 4 Elsies who all lived in the same community in the Chickasaw Nation, who all lived in the same community. Some were slaves of different individuals from Chickasaw country, but they were all interconnected. And it's amazing their lives that they lived and how these families started working together, really fighting for their rights because they knew something was going on. Westward expansion was coming in. Not only whites, but blacks were coming in from southern states. And they were like, wait a minute, we've always been here. And who are these people coming in? These were people whose culture was immersed in the nations, and they were truly amazing. They have left footprints on the soil of what is now Oklahoma. But I'm just thrilled as I'm looking at this map and I'm thinking, okay, yeah, the Coheys were in that area. Oh, yeah. The Chicos were in that area. Those are some of Sandy's people. And, but it's like, wow, I look at this and I can go to the Dawes cards, which was part of that land allotment process, and pull family after family after family from most of these communities that are on that map. This is a great map, by the way. I really love seeing it too. So, but I'll stop here and let you either jump in or ask questions or what have you.
I'm going to turn it over to our scholar, and this is Dr. Dorscine. We want to hear from you, and Angela, thank you so much. I will want to say this right here. When you look at this map here, you look and see Graham is on there. You look at Elmore City, you see Tatum's, you see all these areas that are right there that was real popular. And even right down here at the bottom in Love County, it says this is the area that Edmund Pickens was buried at. Edmund Pickens was the first person that was like the leader. That's why they named it Pickens before Oklahoma became statehood. So after statehood, that's when they changed to Carter County in 1907. And I have a lot of research that I've been going through, but I'm going to stop here. Dr. Littles, you are up. Talk to us and take it from here, if you would, please.
Oh, she's muted.
You're muted. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Go right ahead, Dr. Little. There you go. We can hear you now.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'll have to give kudos to Angela. She is the real expert, particularly on the original people that were here with the native tribes and the ones that came in later. And from that aspect, I wanted to ask a question. We had a discussion on Sunday night about Homer. And so I wanted to ask Angela, I know that there was another settlement close to Homer that was made of freedmen. What was the name of that?
Was it Wiley? Was it?
I think it was Wiley.
Okay, I think it's Wiley. Yeah.
Okay, I couldn't remember it.
It's
But
right there. I
anyway,
see it there, Wiley, right there.
Okay, all right. So the little bit that I can add to that, you had two groups of people that looked similar to each other. You had the freedmen and you had the state Negroes, but they were different culturally and they did not get along because the freedmen thought the state Negroes were too servile, that they had been under bondage. They had been trained by the white men to act humble and to be deferent around them. And the state Negroes thought that the freedmen were too wild, that they were almost like uncivilized because they wore feathers and they spoke a different language and ate a different food. And so overall, they had probably a different worldview about freedom. But the uniting force that brought them together was the Senate Bill 1, enacted by the state of Oklahoma when it gained statehood. And it forced all people of color to go to the same school. And that's what made them a one nation of people, of Black people, was the fact that they went to school. But one thing that united both groups is they all believed in education. So they had subscription schools, they had common schools, they had Indian schools. So no matter whether they were freedmen or native, they knew the importance of education. And so they all started going to school together. The Indian schools at one time had both state Negroes and had some white people in the schools. Wherever there were schools that were available, they realized that schooling was important. So a lot of the different races, three united in school at one time. Statehood probably in a way undermined the building of the relationship between the groups, because life was hard on the prairie. And so you had to depend upon each other. So if I think if those laws had not come in, separating people, teaching people that one group was better than the other, I think that the state of Oklahoma would have evolved into a more humane state without the Senate Bill number 1.
Dr. Littles, I want to jump in and I need you and Angela to kind of comment, because and I know Kwame and everyone knows, especially Martin, when you go out to a Berwyn and you go out to Calvary Church, you will see 3 bricks, the school, the Dawes Academy, and one of the most smartest, I mean, talented buck.
I'm on a podcast. I'll play that.
Was the one who went to Dawes Academy, went to school right there, and put out some of the smartest people in the world. So Angela, between you and Dorscine, talk about the history of Dawes Academy and what it meant back during that time period, if you would, please.
Okay, I think I had to unmute myself there. Yeah, Dawes Academy has a very interesting history. And there was a very interesting article that was published in 1971, and it did give a little bit of history about the school, Dawes Academy. There was a Miss Dawes who was said to have been one of the founders or the founder of Dawes Academy. And I'm going to ask you if I can possibly share my screen with you.
And go right ahead, Angela, go ahead.
Okay, I can go ahead and do that. Give me just a second. Well, one of the questions, of course, that's often asked, and this is from an article. Let me know when you can see my screen, and I'll
We can
start.
see it. Go ahead.
Okay, great.
There it is.
Okay, this is an article from the Daily Oklahoman in 1971 that included an image. Now, this is a drawing, and it's a drawing by one of the former students at the school. I think his name was Tom Posse or something. It's a hyphenated name. But what's interesting is that there was a woman, Mary Elizabeth Allen Dawes. She was actually considered the founder of the school. She was originally from Vermont. She had married another gentleman, Hiram Dawes, not to be confused with Henry L. Dawes, who wrote the Dawes Allotment Act, which broke up Indian Territory. Different person, who was a senator from Massachusetts. But she was married to a man, Hiram Dawes. And they were missionaries, and they wanted to work upon the Negroes in Indian Territory. And she ended up getting about $1,000. She raised some money after her husband had died. She continued the missionary work and helped to establish the school in Berwyn. Now, you mentioned the fact that there are 3 steps that are still visible, and this is in Berwyn, I believe. Let me see here if I can share it. I'll just share it from right where I am. Okay, of course, these are some of the people who attended it, but I'm going to get to this image right here. You mentioned the 3 bricks or stones. These are the steps of what used to be Dawes Academy. They're still there on the grounds, from what I understand, at Calvary Baptist Church in Gene Autry. I call it Berwyn. That's the historic name. And this is what remains of the academy. And this article from the Daily Oklahoman, though, is a sketch of Dawes Academy that was sort of attached to the church, and was really what remains of it. But I think the one thing that Dr. Dorscine did mention was the love of education, and that's the one thing that they did have with state people who had moved in from different parts of the South. And even prior to that, there were other schools throughout the territory among freedmen, among all the 5 tribes, but particularly in this area, this is a school that many people were educated and was considered a very important institution. And of course, that's the image we're referring to. There's some references in the Indian Pioneer paper interviews that people talked about it. Robert Cobb, who was part of the Cohee and Cobb family, and they came out of Springer. And he was interviewed. This is an excerpt that Terry shared this with me. And this is from the Indian Pioneer Papers, which is a series of interviews taken in 1937 and 38 in the state of Oklahoma with people who had lived in the territory prior to statehood, prior to 1907. And he talked about the fact that, of course, he and his family members obtained their own primary education at Dawes Academy. But also, what's also significant, though, when you talk about the freedmen of Indian Territory, is land. Don't forget, the history of this whole country is about land and the acquisition of land. When people came in from Europe, they saw a continent, they wanted the land. They pushed the people out who were there because they wanted the land. They needed help to till the soil. They brought in people, enslaved them. Well, first they enslaved the people who were here, but many of them were succumbing to disease. And they said, wait a minute, there's some strong folks from Africa. We can bring them in as well. And we became the tools of what? The land.
Hold that thought, Angela. You done made me do something right quick.
Okay.
I gotta go to my picture and I gotta pull this up. So
okay, let me stop sharing and let you see what you're gonna share. There we go.
1887, Ardmore, Oklahoma. The land that was before the state of Oklahoma. Land rush.
Land rush. And the official land rush was 2 years later. So you're looking at some people who were jumping the gun, and which is where the state mascot, the Sooners, came from, the people who got there ahead of time. But it is true that it's all about the land. What was the whole allotment process about? It was to teach people who had owned land in common for decades to say, oh, stop doing that. We want you to have private parcels of land. The purpose was to open up the remaining, after they distributed the lands to everybody, freedmen, citizens designated by blood, whatever, but the remaining millions of acres of land were now open for white settlement. It is all about land. But what
the unassigned territory.
I'm sorry?
The unassigned territory.
Yes, yes. But the issue in particular was an issue of land and control of land. That's an issue that's still today. We hear of not just gerrymandering, but things in terms of who's occupying what space. It's always about land. Wars are fought over land, and it's all more important. And that's why, particularly when I was sharing this particular image, and I have to thank Terry for sharing this with Robert Cobb.
You can go
Look
right
at
back
this.
ahead. Go ahead, Angela.
Well, take a look though at what it talked about him breeding livestock, and he taught his sons the love of the land. And this is one thing that Freedmen had as an advantage, that state Negroes didn't come in. Many came in with the land rush. But don't forget, our folks had been there since the 1830s. And here people are coming in, the land rush of 1887, 89, 1890, and others were just drifting in. They heard Edwin McCabe put out a call to people in Tennessee, go west. Some went to Kansas, but some came into Oklahoma. But the fact is that our folks who were there, first of all, they knew the land. As people brought in, as enslaved people, they worked the land. And most importantly, what happened after statehood? Freedmen lands were not protected. But those who had lands who were designated as by blood, their lands were protected. But that meant that freedmen lands were subjected to taxation, and their lands could be lost straight or stolen, particularly stolen. There were people who, as they were called, land grafters, were coming in and tricking people out of their land. So the issue of land is critical. And even more so, I hope at some point in time, people who are looking to really seek other forms of empowerment will start to buy back the land. And I appreciate the work that Kwame Mboya has done. I've been following you, Mr. Mboya. I know what you're doing with the farmers, and it's still about land. Farmers, what do they work on? The land. And so, you know, this is so important. We need to own land. And I tell people, you know, if you don't own even a small parcel of land, if you don't own it, then that means that you are one rent check away from being homeless. Get some land. It is very, very important. And our people knew that. And Robert Cobb, who spoke about that, and he attended Dawes Academy, which is so very, very important. And so many others did. And of course, probably one of the most famous students, Buck Colbert Franklin. We know him as, of course, the father of John Hope Franklin. He was also a very distinguished attorney. We know about the work that he did after the Tulsa Massacre in 1921. He also got his first schooling at Dawes Academy, and many people are just not aware. And he was interviewed with the Indian Pioneer Papers as well in the 1930s. So there's so much to tell and so much more to tell. But the fact of the matter is, all of this is our history, and it belongs to all of us. This is just sort of the unwritten part, or some of the unwritten chapters of our history. And I'm hoping many more people will start to research the history of the freedmen families, not just your grandpa, but the associates, your grandparents. They worshiped with other people. They worked with other people. They went to school with other people. They worked in the fields, toiling and farming their land. They raised cattle with other people. They had disputes and quarrels with other people, and they married other people. They were part of a community. We've got to go back and rebuild those communities and talk about them. Let's put those stories back on the Oklahoma landscape from which they came. Because right now, there are three stories when it comes to Black history of Oklahoma: Black towns, Tulsa Massacre, and civil rights. They're all very important stories. But guess who was there 8 decades before the first of the Black towns? People who were brought during the years of the Indian removal, and some even prior to that, because some came even before the treaties were signed. So it is important that we study this history and document it. It belongs to all of us. So I'll stop talking right now.
We got to go with questions right now. I see Patricia there, Dorscine there, and then people, Sandy, I know you want to say something, but we have to talk about this because they're not teaching us this in school. The only way you're going to find out about it is you're going to have to go to the library and research it. I have books.
Could I just say one other?
I have a question.
Let me put this footnote in. Kwame, and then I'll defer to you. The Native Americans, after the distribution of the land to individual ownership rather than land held in common, the Native Americans, the government placed overseers over the Native Americans. And so the Native Americans couldn't sign anything. They had to have a person to manage their land and manage their resources. And so they lost millions of acres through chicanery. Sometimes men would marry women, Native American women, and they would kill them. They would steal children and adopt them. And then the child would disappear, but the land belonged to the overseer, and so there was all kinds of underhanded criminal behavior that was exerted to remove that land from the ownership of not only the Native Americans, but also the African Americans lost a lot of land. For example, as Angela said, to taxes, and because if you were a Native person, if you were a freedman, you went into ownership without knowing about taxes, and so that caused. Why? I have a honey. I have a visitor. I'll let you all say hello to it.
Hey, how you
Okay,
doing?
bye-bye.
She want to know. Yeah, she wants to know. Go ahead. And then we're gonna bring Kwame in, okay?
Okay.
Okay,
Kwame?
I would like Dorscine or Dr. Lewis or Angela speak on
Money.
the Indians or the indigenous people. I hate to call them Indians. Indigenous people had land in common. But one of the reasons my research found out that Dawes, the one who initiated the Dawes Treaty, he felt that as long as the indigenous people held land in common, that they couldn't really come up to, as he quoted, like educated people, or come up, because he felt that through individualism, so to speak, that people could rise up above them where they are. So that was one of the reasons in my research why he initiated the destruction of communal property among the indigenous people, because he felt that you really couldn't rise up to civilization, because through communalism, that they had to be individualistic to rise up. So that was one of the main reasons why the communal lands were divided up. So could anyone speak on that?
Well, I'll simply point out that, again, understand he wrote the legislation. Henry L. Dawes did write the legislation. He was a senator from Massachusetts. And the concern was about Indian lands. It's, again, I say it's all about the land. Mm-hmm. But you had individuals who held land in common, and you had people who were coming into the territory. They were supposedly going to just go along the strip, Cherokee Strip, but people were coming in as intruders. There are all kinds of census records you see. The issue was, let's teach them private land ownership. There are less than 100,000 people who are there. Get them all a parcel of land. Millions of acres will be left, and then white settlement can come in. And statehood was approaching. In fact, one of the things that you'll find that within the nations, there were many people who were totally against statehood, who did not want anything to do with it, including freedmen as well. You had the case, particularly in Chickasaw country and in Choctaw country, you had freedmen who had started saying, well, wait a minute, we're only getting 40 acres. Now, if it's a family of 8 or 10 people, you might say, hey, well, that's a big chunk of land. Everybody, including babies, gets 40 acres. That's not bad. But those designated as intermarried whites or by blood got 8 times more land. Each of them, including their babies, got 320 acres. 40 acres or 8 times more, 320. They got one tiny slice of a very large pie. And the freedmen in the Choctaw and Chickasaw Nation said, well, why? So of course the tribes had this policy, well, they're by blood. Well, a lot of people had been fathered by Indian slaveholders, just like in the Deep South. Plenty of slaveholders and masters and overseers also had children with enslavement. So some of them said, well, can we get on the blood roll then? And you had close to 2,000 people. It was about 1,800 people, maybe a little bit more, who actually requested to be transferred from the freedman roll to the by blood roll so they could get 320 acres of land. It's still about occupation of land because these tribes were always considered the so-called quote unquote civilized tribes. So, and they were given that designation early on. They had become Christian. They had started farming the way the settlers were farming. And so they had given up some traditional ways, and many of the leaders were sending their sons and daughters to schools on the East Coast, to Ivy League institutions. You know, the Pitchlands, the Rosses, they were sending their sons to Dartmouth. So they were already, quote unquote, civilized on paper by European standard. The issue was about land acquisition, because once 91,000 people who ended up on the Dawes roll, that's the total number of people, 91,000, big number, but still millions more can now pour in and settle in the lands that became, because then suddenly there were the two territories, Oklahoma Territory, Indian Territory. Let's merge now and make this great state of Oklahoma, which did happen, of course. But there were plenty of people in tribal sectors, including freedmen, and particularly those who were trying to even have at least more of the acreage allotted to them, and who were saying, but wait a minute, you know, our whole life is being turned upside down. And those who'd been enslaved in particular knew something that was going to happen was not going to be in their favor.
Let me ask a question right quick, Angela. I got to ask this question. I got Kwame and Flossie's daddy up on the screen right here.
Oh,
Alfred McCarson. Kwame, how did your dad make that happen with all those McCarson brothers and your uncle with the barbecue business? And how did y'all have land in Ardmore and be out there in Springer? How did y'all pull that off?
Well, first of all, touching on what Angela said, that the McCarsons were considered like interlopers. During the Chickasaw, that's at the very turn of the century, before the turn of the century, the Chickasaw Indians were afraid that the interlopers, people coming into the Indian tribe in Indian land, would outnumber the Indians, would be sort of like the Israelites and things of this nature, and they would more or less overrun them. This is what I'm hearing. The Cursons were interlopers, like we came from North Carolina and things of this nature. And my great-grandfather settled out in Berwyn, Oklahoma, and he married this lady, but I believe she was a Chickasaw freeman. But they were afraid to register their land upon their name, because if they did, he would have been kicked out. His name was like Hughie McCarson. He would have been kicked out off of the land. So Miss Angela, she probably can speak better than I can on this, more historical wise, but they didn't want the blacks who were coming into the Chickasaw Nation at the time. They didn't want them because they were afraid that the blacks or Africans would outnumber the Indians, or the Chickasaw Indians, and control it. And one other thing, I would like Angela to speak on this as well. There were, just before Oklahoma became statehood, that the blacks, particularly up and around Muskogee, wanted Oklahoma to be an all-black state. Now, there was a lawyer and also an educator, and three others went to Washington, D.C. to lobby Roosevelt to make Oklahoma an all-black state, because at that time, Oklahoma, before they became a statehood, their legislation, their constitution had more racist laws than some of the southern states. So they went to appeal to Roosevelt at that particular time, President Roosevelt, but Roosevelt didn't allow it. But anyway, could somebody speak on that?
Oh, Angela, no, go ahead, Angela.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Sorry about that. Actually, the dates are a little bit different. Legislation began as early as 1867, and a bill was introduced. I can't remember the number of the bill, but next time I can, and if not, we can have Ron Graham, who's definitely a scholar when it comes to pre-freedmen, to address it. But in 1867, in the House of Representatives, there was a bill that was introduced in the House in Washington to establish a territory known as the Territory of Lincoln. A map was actually created, and if I have a chance, I'll try and find it. Maybe, well, I see we're getting out of time here, but maybe another time I can actually bring it up, unless you have Ron to come in and really talk about it. But it was in 1867 legislation was brought up to establish the Territory of Lincoln. It was proposed at that time that the Territory of Lincoln, and a map of it showed a map that is identical to what is now the map of Oklahoma. So this is right after the Civil War. This wasn't even 20th century, it was 1867. But what's interesting that the stipulation required, and there is a quote that you can actually pull from the congressional record where the bill suggested that the governor of the state be a person of African descent, the governor of the Territory of Lincoln. And so that the story of that, I think, has just morphed over the years. Oh yeah, it happened, 1910, 1930 or whatever. It was actually as early as 1867. And but there is a map that actually shows the territory. Last year, I believe Ron Graham actually gave a presentation either in Tulsa or Oklahoma City. And he actually presented the map, and I have a screenshot of it someplace.
You want to share it? And I have it too as well, but I have
okay,
to
please share it if you have it.
I don't have it on this computer, but I do.
Okay.
Okay.
We can do it in the future, and maybe if you're able to get Ron to address it, because he's really very, very probably more knowledgeable than anyone. But he teaches in I have a genealogy institute that I coordinate a track on the freedmen of the 5 civilized tribes, and it's every July, the week after the 4th of July, 3 days, 12 classes over those 3 days, and he usually teaches that class on the territory of Lincoln and the history of it and the congressional bill that came from. But that was the origin, 1867. Yes.
And the most important thing is there were more African-American towns in that Indian territory than any state in the United States during that time period.
Well, actually, by the time, what is the number? I've heard 50, I've heard more. By, I would say, the early 20th century was when those numbers had really swollen, because a lot of people poured into the territory and poured into both territories, certainly by the end of the 19th century and early 20th century. And also, I have learned that there's a neighborhood in Oklahoma City, and that was actually mostly freedmen who had left or lost their land. And they formed, yes, Sandtown is the neighborhood, and it was mostly Chickasaw freedmen. I asked another person about it, and she said, well, I grew up in Oklahoma City. I remember that neighborhood. Those people were really very, very poor. And I said, were they poor or were they country? Because a lot of people think they see country people and assume that it's just poverty. I said, those are probably country people coming off of their land allotments in Chickasaw territory. And
it was a location. It was a location mostly. Sandtown was right on the Canadian River.
Yes.
And so periodically it would flood. So just as you got a toehold or, got some assets, there would be a flood and it would be swept away.
Sound like what Berwyn was set up when it was first put together. They had to move it, was on the Cattle Creek, and they had to move it into our town. Don't think the Berwyn was in the original spot. That was, where was it at, Dorscine? It was right there on the creek, right?
All I've heard is the creek. I really have not been in Berwyn enough to understand the layout, but I know the stories, but I can't speak.
Right. I got that history. That's another segment, but we only got about 9 minutes left. Sandy, Patricia, Martin, do any of y'all have a question for any of them as well? Sandy?
No, I don't really have a question. I just, number one, wanted to say hello to everybody. I'm Sandy Williams. I am, my original name is Sandy Bruce. My father was Douglas Bruce, and my mother was Lonzetta James. So I just wanted to say hello to Mr. Maytubby and also Kwame and also Roy Thurston.
Yep. You know, go ahead, Kwame. You know they family.
Yeah, you know, I'm sure all of you know my family, the James family, the Bruces, the
Oh, yeah.
Boyds, the Montgomerys, the Loves, the Gaines. I just had so many family names that were freedmen names around that area. My parents went to Dunbar and also to Douglas. I have relatives that live in Long Grove, in Cheek, Hendricks, just everywhere in Oklahoma. And I studied that area. And my mom, like I was saying on the last meeting, that my mom just had such fond memories of her years growing up in Ardmore. And I just feel like I know you all. So hello to everybody, and thanks for doing this, Cedric.
Kwame, you got something to say to her?
Well, sound like she's kinfolk to me.
You know the McCarsons and the McKessons, okay?
I do. I certainly do. I know all of these names, and my father would tell me all about you all, Douglas, and my mother as well, Lanzetta, and she just had a ball. They had a ball living there. So again, it's just so great to see all your faces.
I like to hear from my kinfolk, Maytubby.
Yeah, go ahead, Martin, and then Patricia, we coming to you next.
Yeah, well, I didn't study anything. I didn't bring anything tonight, just that I am a Choctaw freedman, same as Angela talked about. The Maytubbys, the Fishers, and I know that they have a rich history, but all this is interesting to me. And also I'm a graduate of Douglas High School. I moved to Ardmore around 1956.
And Martin, I want to tell you
learned a lot.
you have family that's in the Sac and Fox Nation in Shawnee, because I ran into some of them up there. And that's the original land right there, you know.
Right, yes.
Is that right, Angela? There's people all up in that area too before statehood, you know?
Oh, yes, and the Osages as well. And so the further north, of course, you go, you get into some of the communities where people who were there before removal. And in fact, there was a little bit of conflict because people were like, "Who are y'all coming in here?" And so absolutely, you're correct.
All right, Patricia, you've been waiting. You're up. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you. I'm Patricia Stevenson Hempstead. I was born and raised in Ardmore. I grew up in Warren United Methodist Church. And so it just appealed to me when you posted that on Facebook about Miss Ainsworth and Miss McCarson. I was in music and they all supported me through, I think Miss McCarson, I think it was the Ladies of Action, but they hosted my piano recitals and different things like that. And so I was just really excited to come and learn more. My families are Stevensons, Murrays, Shannon, and Taylors. And so it's just, I'm just glad to be here.
You're truly from Ardmore with all those names, you know.
I know, right?
She's truly from Milo.
What city are you in?
On her paternal side.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
The Stevensons.
Where are you from? Where do you live now, Patricia?
I live in Dallas. Actually, it's Princeton, Texas, but it's outside of McKinney.
We know where that is. And Sandy, you're in Arizona, right?
No, I moved from Arizona. I was born and raised. My family migrated to Arizona, but now I am in California. So I'm in Southern California.
Wow, I got you. And Julia, we're going to say hello to you. Julia, do you have anything to say? Because I'm going to ask Dorscine to close us out. And I'm going to pop up on the screen a couple other pictures before we get out of here. But Julia, do you have anything you want to say? If you don't, then we understand, but we're just glad that you're listening. And there are so many people that are following us. Okay, I just want to make sure because we're here for everybody. And Angela, before I turn it over to Dorscine, you have to give your information for those who want to reach out to you.
Oh, okay. Well, you can find me on Facebook for sure. So those who are watching from Facebook, just hop me up and send me a friend request. Send some sort of message so I know that you're coming from watching this program. And but you can also I have a YouTube channel. I'm going to start this year making videos weekly, profiling different families from the territory. I'm also involved in a major book project right now, but hoping to have some things handed in pretty soon and get that part behind me, or at least that stage behind me. But you can also reach me at Gmail, aywaltonraji@gmail.com.
Thank you so much. Okay, she's on the screen. Dorscine, tell us about the legendary Gloria Ainsworth.
Oh, nice.
Oh, let's not talk about her in such a brief time. Let's talk. I was prepared today to talk about education and the great scholars and teachers we had, not only in Ardmore, but in the surrounding areas. And Miss Ainsworth taught in in Berwyn, as well as in the Ardmore Public School. And also, I was going to talk about desegregation and the effect that it had on the cities that was most affected by it, Ardmore, and many of the surrounding towns. We had the surrounding areas like Graham and Springer and Berwyn all had to integrate. And so that changed the dynamics of the heritage a little bit, because we lost that information. And so it is very important that we recapture our history and take pride in the strength, the resilience, the ingenuity, whatever it was required to survive. Our ancestors and forefathers and foremothers had it. And we need to realize that and draw on that strength.
And you know what? And we're going to have to talk a little bit more about her, because you mentioned something, and I'm about to show y'all something on the screen if I can pull it up, because it is an incredible story. You're gonna look at this picture and you're gonna say, wow, I've been researching on this for a long time. So here we go. And this is transfer students from Lincoln to Central in Milo in 1956. And we see names of these women who played basketball. Holding the ball is June Evelyn Stevenson. We got Clarence Pickens, Lily Faye Gordon, Shirley Ann Roberts. These are people, this goes back Milo to Lincoln, and we're going to talk about that on our next session about that. And I know y'all look at what they're wearing. They all got knee pads. They all got their shoes. And you got to remember, back in Oklahoma, there was no full court basketball. They went back and forth. They went 6-on-6. So you had 3 guards and 3 forwards. Have y'all ever heard of that before?
Wow.
Hey, Cedric, I love that photo. That's a cousin of mine. Actually, Faye Gordon is a cousin.
Right.
Yeah.
And it says Central on their jerseys. Comments? I just want to hear what y'all got to say.
Central was a recently built school when integration was coming in. They had excellent facilities. They taught technology. They taught agricultural classes, as well as I guess what you call how to fix things and electronics and things like that. And when integration came, Central, this high school shut down. And one of the things I was going to talk about is the loss of many of our finest teachers because of integration. But Central was a new facility, had all of the latest modern things, and the high school students had to transfer to Graham. And Graham had nothing like that, but because Graham was a white school, the students transferred from Central to Graham in high school.
Where was Lincoln at?
Lincoln was in Berwyn.
That's what I thought. And then I'm gonna share something else with you. But like I said, there's a story behind the story because of what happened during that time period. And it's just an incredible story. And I have so many pictures that I've been working on, and I'm gonna share my screen. And it talks about, I think somebody's watching it and we get that one. So let me go ahead and see if I can mute it.
Echo.
There we go. I got it right there. And so, you know, because people are chiming in and they're watching and they want to hear this stuff. They want to know what's going on. So I'm going to try to share my screen. But like I said, there's so much that I've been working on that I have to share. And this is the Abram family. As you see this whole family right here, it says Beverly Abram, Michael Harrison, Nancy Abram, Theodore Harrison, Roderick Abram, James Abram Jr., Mildred Ashby, Antoinette Harrison, Johnny Abram, Jess Abram, Johnny Potts, Charlotte Pearson, and Charlene Abram. Abrams lived all out in Berwyn. Is that right, Dorscine?
Actually, they were in Milo. And, and at one time, I think they had 640 acres. That's a section.
Are you serious?
It was a lot of people had a lot of land in Milo at one time. And one thing I wanted to say about Central, they had yearbooks at Central, and they had all kind of activities, the same activities that Ardmore Douglas had. Central had those same activities, proms and all kinds of plays and things like that. And the school was so new and was so well equipped. Beulah Tibbs Abram was my second grade teacher. And but the school was so well equipped. We had students that came to Central, and I barely remember it because as I said, it closed down. But they had students coming to school from as far away as Boswell. They were rooming with people because they wanted to be in that school that had all of the areas. Nancy Abrams' husband, I can't remember his name, Lorenzo Breckenridge. He was a teacher at Central, and he taught some kind of technology classes. But I'm telling you, when they built those schools in the rural areas, they put things in there that would benefit students coming straight out of high school. So you could either go to college or you would have a trade when you graduated from high school, so that you could be.
I knew the Breckenridges from Boswell. This is Mayzola speaking. But also, I just want to say one thing real quick, brother. Ed Abram, he's the one who gave the land for Macedonia Baptist Church, which is still standing today. So we really have an awful lot of history.
Right. Ed Abram was the one that had all the land.
Right.
He got Alzheimer's.
Wow.
And so he got tricked out of the family got tricked out of a lot of the land.
Well, the person I know was J.B. Abram, and he was a coach. And Kwame, I know you know that. Martin, I know that you knew Mr. Abrams was a coach too as well. And he was over at Dunbar. Is that right?
No, he was at high school.
He was at high school at Douglas High.
And James Baker taught at Douglas High School also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so much history that's out here. I have to look at the clock, and I promise I was going to be obedient. Flossie, we didn't get a chance to hear from you, and I'm going to ask you to unmute because we got your picture up here, and I saw it on your page. But Flossie, I'd love to hear you close out, and then we're going to pick this up again on next week, and we're going to take it to a whole nother level because I found the picture of Mentha before she of honor. So Flossie,
okay.
Close the comment.
Good evening, everyone.
Oh.
I am just so honored to see you and to hear. I'm learning a whole lot. I'm just like Mr. Mayzola when it comes to knowing things about my upraising and stuff. I know those things, and they're really good. From on White Street, I will just love to tell you some things that happened on White Street.
Go ahead. You got a few minutes. Just give us something, please.
Oh, give you something, please.
Yes, please.
Well, anything that we saw at the movie Uptown, we would get home and try. So we had our own private jungle. How about that? and it was really good. But I'll tell you some things about that. I thank you so very much. Anytime you've just been so wonderful, Mr. Bailey, sharing some things about my mom. And then I have Kwame. Kwame's my brother. And so I don't have to know all of those things. I just go to him. So I'm pretty sure that you have taught me something. I need to really, really get someplace where I can study and share some of, and especially find out my cousins. That is going to be really, really a wonderful part of this journey. So God bless each of you. And until we
But
meet
hold on a second.
again.
This picture, we got the picture I had up a while ago with all the cheerleaders that I got in the background. Please tell us about Miss Lackey. Please tell us about her, if you would, please, and what it was like
Yes,
being a cheerleader. You know what I mean?
Mrs. Lackey, I tell you, if I look at a thimble right today, I know I have to put it on. She was one wonderful teacher, and she could tell you if you got a dot off
What?
when you were doing your when you were learning how to sew. She was it, but she also cared about how we were just like Mrs. Baker. I haven't heard anyone talk about Mrs. Baker. You had to walk straight.
She's on the list too. It's so much from Ardmore.
Oh.
It's so many trailblazers.
That's me. I didn't hear your question.
I said we have so many trailblazers. We hadn't even talked about. We hadn't even talked about the Cowboys. We hadn't even talked about the Black policemen. We hadn't talked about none of that. It's so much, you know.
That is so true. But
this picture here, are these your friends? Who's holding the flag?
Yes, my friends, Wardell, Evelyn, Linda, Pee Wee, Musgrove, that's me, and Fayreen. I kept trying to look to see who the teacher was though, because it's kind of a blurry.
Tolliver?
Miss Tolliver. Yes, that is okay. She was my 6th grade teacher.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to just say thank you, everybody, because I got to stop now. But I do want to say to the people that are out there, we have got to do this. I need you to pray that I can find a museum to put this history together. My goal is, I've already talked to Clayton Benjamin and some of the family members, is the Carl Rhodes collection. This man has 100,000 photos. He took pictures of every Black family in Ardmore, not only Black families, but white families too as well. But we know where the collection is, but we got to do that. We got to preserve that. That has to be a documentary of the rich history. And I want everybody to remember, before there was an Oklahoma City, before there was a Tulsa, it all started when the Chickasaw Nation and the Choctaws came from those different Trail of Tears and stopped those wagons, and half of them lost their life because of migration. And Angela, you're gonna have to tell us about what happened with Andrew Jackson, why they had to leave in the first place. That's a whole nother story.
Don't get me started tonight.
We gotta stop and just let everybody know that we gotta tell the story, because every time I cross those tracks, I think about it. See, we ride on top of them, but they don't know, but right below those streets, those are bricks that were built by African Americans, and we had to walk on Main Street on bricks. And I know Roy because his mom and them had a snow cone stand right there on the corner, right behind the old movie theater. So those people paved the way for us, and during that time period, and most of the streets were all dirt. And so there's so much to be thankful for. I didn't even tell you about my teacher, Miss Watts, who was right there on 1st Street off of East Street going toward Jefferson. And I had to go to piano lessons, and they was paying her 50 cents an hour to teach me how to play the piano. But I was busy down at McCarson barbecue, learning how to bust tables so I can make some money to help my mama. That's just the way it was. I want to say thank you. You know what I mean? And also, Dr. Littles is going to be speaking in Oklahoma City, and Greg Turner. That is family for the McCarson family. Roy, that's your nephew. Not a lot of people don't know, but this young man is doing great things in Boston. He's been to New Orleans, and he's going to be speaking in Midwest City. So Dr. Littles, while I'm looking for that flyer, can you tell us what's going to be happening, where you're going to be at on Friday night?
It's Friday the 13th at 7 o'clock. It's at a banquet in Midwest City, at Rose State Bank or something like that. It's a scholarship fund being sponsored by Avery Chapel Church. LaDonna Miller from Ardmore is over that scholarship fund over the banquet. And so it was just ironic that there are two people from Ardmore that are on the speaking list. And Dr. Cecilia Robinson Woods, I believe, is the principal at Millwood. And I think our assigned topic is how we transversed, or how we got to where we are. What were some of the methods that we used to become whoever we are now.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate it. I got the flyer on the screen. And so, there's the information right there. We'll be praying that it goes well. So just know this, Ardmore has put together some of the most prominent people in this country. When you go to Oklahoma City on South May, and you go there on that campus of OCCC, Oklahoma City Community College, know that president is originally from Ardmore, who grew up on the north side, and her name is Maltra.
And I was one of the first people hired when the campus opened. I was a counselor.
Yeah. And it's so much history. We got Judge David Lewis from right here in Ardmore. So don't tell me we don't have great people. We need to get our young people back on track. We need them in school. We need them to go to college, get their degrees, and continue to go on and know their legacy. Dorscine, you get the final say so.
Well, I just want to defer to our principal online. So Patricia, tell about your experiences being a principal in Dallas.
Okay, sorry about my experience and as a principal in Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just listening to you all right now, it kind of makes me sad because our students, we don't get to learn about any of this down here or when I was in school. So once again, I just wanted to say thank you. I feel blessed to be an administrator, and it is because of all of these people that you spoke of prior, Ms. Ainsworth, Ms. Baker. They all were big role models for me. And so that's why what I try to do, continue that legacy and impact our younger generation.
Where'd you go to college at, Patricia, by the way? Where'd you attend?
University of Oklahoma.
Much sooner. But thank you so much. And we need more people to be teachers and everything. So we're going to close out. As a matter of fact, I'm going to close out with a prayer. Okay. Let us go before God. Lord, we thank you so much for this history of Ardmore from an African-American perspective. Continue to bless us. Turn our community around. And Lord, we're getting ready to celebrate Martin Luther King holiday. So we're going to be at the center on Monday. We're going to be there. And we're going to do everything we can to remember the legacy that has been bestowed upon us. So continue to bless our community, our country. And we just want to give you the hope, the honor, the glory, and never forget where we came from. We stand on broad shoulders of people who have taught us the best, and we just want to carry it on. In Jesus' name we pray, we say amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Thank